You don't actually not care. You just learned very early that caring too much hurts, and you've been pretending ever since. There's this moment. It happens fast. Someone gets close. An opportunity opens. A conversation starts going somewhere real. And right before it deepens, something inside you tightens. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small shift. You pull back. You delay replying. You suddenly feel tired, or distracted, or unsure. You tell yourself it's nothing, but it's never nothing. I used to think I was just cautious, thoughtful, independent. I wore those words like they were personality traits. But if I'm honest, they were armor. Because underneath all that, I'm fine on my own energy. There was something else. A quiet pulse of fear I didn't want to name. Not fear of danger. Fear of feeling. There are fears we talk about easily. Heights. Failure. Public speaking. And then there are the ones that don't even feel like fear. They feel like habits, like preferences, like this is just how I am. That's the kind that shaped my life. I didn't realize how often I changed the subject when conversations got too close to my childhood. How quickly I joked when someone asked what I really wanted. How I stayed busy at night, scrolling, watching, doing anything but sitting still. Because stillness is loud. When everything goes quiet, the body remembers things the mind tried to pack away. A tone of voice, a look, the feeling of not being chosen, not being heard, not being safe enough to fall apart. I wouldn't have called it fear. I would have called it being strong. But strength doesn't usually feel like constant tension in your shoulders. Doesn't feel like rehearsing conversations in your head before they happen. It doesn't feel like planning exits from situations that haven't even gone wrong yet. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from guarding yourself all the time. Not from people necessarily, but from the possibility of being exposed. I avoided certain risks, but I framed it as waiting for the right time. I avoided vulnerability, but I framed it as having standards. I avoided rest, but I framed it as being productive. It took me years to notice the pattern. Every time something mattered deeply, I felt the urge to downplay it. Every time I wanted something intensely, I found a reason to delay it. It's strange how fear doesn't always show up as panic. Sometimes it shows up as overthinking, as perfectionism, as procrastination that feels strangely protective. Like, if I don't try fully, I can't fully fail. If I don't attach too deeply, I can't be abandoned. If I don't hope too much, I can't be disappointed. Those thoughts never said themselves out loud. They just guided me quietly. I'd be about to send a message, and then reread it 10 times. About to take a step, and suddenly feel uncertain for reasons I couldn't explain. It's like there was an invisible hand redirecting me, gently but firmly. And the worst part is, I thought it was me. I thought this was my personality, my preferences, my logic. I didn't realize I was still reacting to old rooms I no longer lived in. There's something almost heartbreaking about that. The way the body keeps protecting you long after the danger has passed. Like a smoke alarm that keeps going off even when there's no fire. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means something once burned. I used to wonder why certain silences felt unbearable, why I needed noise at night, why I felt restless when everything was calm. Calm felt suspicious. Calm felt like the moment before something bad happens. So I kept moving, kept improving, kept achieving. Because if I was impressive enough, useful enough, independent enough, maybe I wouldn't feel that old, buried vulnerability. But no amount of achievement silences a fear you won't acknowledge. It just gives it new disguises. Sometimes it disguised itself as ambition, sometimes as detachment, sometimes as being hard to read. Underneath all of it was a simple, terrifying possibility. What if I'm not enough, and someone eventually sees that? That question doesn't shout, it whispers, and it shapes entire lives. I noticed how I'd choose people who felt slightly unavailable, just enough distance to feel safe, just enough uncertainty to stay guarded, because if someone truly saw me, fully, without barriers, I didn't know what would happen. It felt safer to stay half-known, safer to keep parts of myself private, even from myself. There's this strange thing about buried fear. It doesn't disappear, it just reroutes. If you suppress the fear of rejection, you might become overly independent. If you suppress the fear of failure, you might never start. If you suppress the fear of being controlled, you might control everything. From the outside, it looks like personality. From the inside, it feels like survival. And survival is stubborn. I can trace so many of my choices back to moments where I felt small and didn't have the space to process it. Moments where it wasn't safe to cry, or question, or need. So I adapted. I learned to need less, to expect less, to show less. And that adaptation worked. It protected me. But protection has a cost. It narrows your world. You stop dreaming too big because big dreams can collapse. You stop loving too deeply because deep love can disappear. You stop resting because rest allows feelings to surface. You become functional, capable, even admirable. But inside, there's this quiet sense that something is unfinished, not broken, just held back. I used to think facing fear meant dramatic confrontation, digging up every memory, forcing myself to relive things. But it started much smaller. It started with noticing how my chest tightened when someone complimented me sincerely, noticing how I felt suspicious when things were going well, noticing how I sabotaged opportunities by waiting until they passed. Fear leaves fingerprints in hesitation, in avoidance, in the stories we tell ourselves about why we can't. And the strangest part is, when you finally sit with it, the fear isn't as monstrous as you imagined. It's younger, it's tender. It's just a part of you that never felt safe enough to be seen. I remember one night, everything was quiet. No distractions, no noise. And instead of reaching for my phone, I just sat there. And I felt it. That old ache. The one that says, don't get too comfortable. Don't trust this. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was tired. And for the first time, I didn't push it away. I realized that so much of my life had been shaped by something I refused to admit existed. Not because I was weak, but because at some point, hiding it was the only way I knew how to cope. There's a grief in recognizing that. Grief for the chances you didn't take, for the words you swallowed, for the closeness you kept at arm's length. But there's also something else. A softness. Because once you see the pattern, it stops feeling like destiny. It starts feeling like a story you can understand. I don't think fear ever fully disappears. I think it changes shape when you stop pretending it's not there. It becomes less of a puppeteer and more of a signal, not an enemy, just a part of you that learned long ago that the world could hurt. And maybe the most honest thing I can say is this: I wasn't avoiding life because I didn't want it. I was avoiding the parts of life that might prove my old fears right. And now, when I feel that familiar hesitation, I don't call myself lazy or broken. I recognize it. It's just that younger part, still whispering, "Are you sure it's safe?" And instead of silencing it, I listen. Not to obey it, just to understand it. Because the moment you realize your personality might actually be a memory, something shifts. The walls don't crumble all at once, but they're no longer invisible. And sometimes, seeing them is enough to start breathing differently. And when you start breathing differently, you notice things you couldn't see before. You notice how often you braced yourself for disappointment, even in happy moments. How your body prepared for loss before anything was actually lost. It's strange how you can be in a room full of warmth and still feel slightly on edge, not because anyone is hurting you, but because somewhere deep inside, you learned that warmth can vanish without warning. So you never fully lean into it. You keep one foot slightly back, just in case. I used to think that was maturity, emotional control, not getting too attached. But it wasn't control. It was anticipation of pain. And anticipation is exhausting. There's something very lonely about constantly preparing for something that hasn't happened. It creates distance before distance is even necessary. You start editing yourself in advance, softening your excitement, minimizing your needs, downplaying your hopes. Because hope feels risky. If you don't expect too much, you won't be crushed too much. That logic feels safe, almost wise, until you realize it quietly shrinks your life. I remember moments when something beautiful was unfolding, and instead of feeling joy, I felt caution, like my body didn't trust the good. That's when it became clearer. The fear wasn't about the present, it was about echoes, old experiences that never fully finished inside me. And they don't show up as memories, they show up as reactions, a raised voice that makes your stomach tighten, even if it isn't directed at you. A delayed reply that suddenly feels like rejection. A neutral expression that you interpret as disappointment. You react first, then you justify it later. And for years, I thought that was intuition. But intuition feels grounded. This felt urgent. There's a difference. Repressed fear has urgency to it. A subtle panic beneath calm behavior. A silent narrative running in the background. Be careful. Don't trust too quickly. Don't rely too much. Don't show everything. It becomes the lens through which you interpret everything. And what hurts the most is that sometimes it makes you leave before you're left. You distance yourself before someone can distance from you. You criticize yourself before someone else can. You shut down before anyone has the chance to misunderstand you. It feels proactive, but it's protective. Protection learned in a time when you didn't have control. I used to pride myself on not needing reassurance. But if I'm honest, I avoided needing it because needing felt dangerous. Needing meant depending, and depending once felt unstable. So I trained myself to operate without it. Independence became my identity. But independence built from fear doesn't feel expansive. It feels rigid. There's no softness in it, no flexibility, just a constant quiet effort to hold yourself together. And when you live like that long enough, you forget what ease feels like. You forget that connection isn't supposed to feel like strategy. You forget that joy doesn't require pre-planning for its ending. It's not dramatic, it's subtle. A life slightly muted. You still function, you still succeed, you still smile. But something inside is always scanning. And when you finally slow down enough to notice that scanning, it's almost shocking. Because you realize you've been guarding against ghosts, not current threats. Old imprints. There's no villain in this story, just a nervous system that adapted quickly. A younger version of you who did the best they could. And when I understood that, something softened. Not because the fear disappeared, but because I stopped being angry at myself for having it. I stopped labeling my hesitation as weakness. I began seeing it as history that had never been spoken out loud. There's a quiet courage in admitting to yourself, I'm not avoiding this because I don't want it. I'm avoiding it because I'm afraid of what it might stir. That sentence alone changes something, because fear loses some of its mystery when you name it. And once it's not mysterious, it's not as powerful. It doesn't vanish, but it no longer runs everything in secret. You start noticing moments where you almost pull away, and instead, you stay a second longer. Not forcing, not proving, just staying. You notice when you almost dismiss a compliment, and instead, you let it land, even if it feels uncomfortable, especially if it feels uncomfortable, because discomfort is often the doorway, and slowly, very slowly, you realize that fear was never trying to ruin your life. It was trying to prevent pain. It just didn't realize that in preventing pain, it was also preventing depth, preventing intimacy, preventing expansion, preventing the full texture of being alive. And that realization isn't loud, it's quiet, like exhaling after holding your breath for years without knowing it. I don't think we ever fully erase these patterns, but awareness changes the relationship. Instead of being unconsciously steered, you start seeing the steering wheel. You start recognizing when a reaction belongs to the past. And that recognition creates space. Space between impulse and action. Space between fear and choice. And in that space, something new becomes possible. Not perfection, not fearlessness, just honesty. Honesty about what still scares you. Honesty about why certain doors feel heavier to open. Honesty about the fact that sometimes your personality was just a survival script. And the moment you see that, you stop confusing defense with identity. You realize you are more than the patterns that protected you, more than the avoidance, more than the guardedness. There's a version of you beneath all that doesn't need to anticipate disaster to feel safe. And maybe that version has been waiting patiently, not demanding, not loud, just waiting for you to notice. So the next time you feel that familiar hesitation, that urge to retreat from something meaningful, instead of judging it, pause, feel it, recognize it. That's not weakness. That's an old part of you asking if it's safe now. And maybe, just maybe, it finally is.